Morning, how are you all? Super. Good stuff. I just need some boundaries. I'm just going to move this over a bit because I like to wander around. So as Matt mentioned, I am from Prison Fellowship Australia. We've been in this country for 40 years this year, so we celebrate our 40th year taking the gospel of Jesus into prisons. For those that don't know, Prison Fellowship was founded by an ex-prisoner, a bloke by the name of Chuck Colson. He was, for those that have got a bit of grey hair like myself, you may remember Watergate. He was President Nixon's right-hand man, and through all of what took place on the court case heading into court over Watergate, he found his faith in Christ. And as he went to the court case, he ended up confessing to some stuff that they did not know that he'd done, and ended up with a 7-month prison sentence. At the end of that, he walked out, and the words that God came to him and just said, "I want you to remember the fellas you've met." So for Chuck Colson, prior to going into politics, he had a successful law firm. He ended up closing that down and focused his attentions on prison ministry and founded Prison Fellowship in 1976. 1978 became Prison Fellowship International. 79 he visited Australia, and in 81 both Victoria and Queensland kicked off taking the gospel into prisons. For me, I get great joy in saying that because I know that for us, we've been going into the places that most people don't want to go into, that people don't want to know, and we've had the joy of seeing God touch and change lives in a way that no one really else gets to see. It's amazing watching someone that might be the toughest of tough men that walk into a jail and get to a point where they're just broken. They've got snot and tears going everywhere because they're broken in what they've done, they're broken in what they've done to their family, and they reach out and they end up on a journey of faith and meeting Jesus, which is absolutely awesome. So in Queensland, we do something quite unique. Prison Fellowship is in 125 countries around the world. In those 125 countries, Queensland is unique in how we take chaplaincy into prisons. It's not done anywhere else in the world, and that's not unique to us, that's unique to Queensland. It's the model that Queensland has chosen to take on, and I think it's the model that best serves men and women inside correctional centres. So we do chaplaincy. We're part of the State Chaplaincy Board that has 6 organisations. Those organisations are the Baptists who run Inside Out Prison Chaplaincy. You've got Uniting Care, the Catholic Prison Ministry, Anglican Prison Ministry and the Salvation Army, and Prison Fellowship. We sit on a group called the State Chaplaincy Board, and that board has a contract with the Queensland Correctional Government to provide pastoral care to every inmate for 4 days a week. I think that's absolutely awesome that the government sees the need to provide pastoral care to every inmate. The beauty of being a volunteer base through the way we do it in Queensland is that those that go into jail want to go. So you're going because you want to demonstrate the love of Jesus. You're not going for any other agenda, any other agenda other than wanting to love on these men and women that are in prison. In every other state, it's a paid position in some way, shape or form, which at times, I spent 7 years as a chaplain in far north Queensland. At times I thought it would have been great to be paid for what I did, but that's the way we do it in Queensland. The thing that sets Prison Fellowship apart from all of the other organisations that do prison ministry in Queensland is we also run programs inside the prison. So we run 3 main programs, one called the Sycamore Tree Project. It's where we take victims of crime into prison, put them in front of perpetrators, not the same perpetrator, and we talk about, basically it's around Jesus and Zacchaeus, and it's a conversation with them, talking to them about this is what your crime has done and it's time for you to take responsibility for your actions, so to speak. Great program, has brilliant success. We've seen God really touch and change lives through that. We also run another program called Change on the Inside. Change on the Inside is where we take 6 godly characters, remove the word godly, and talk about character building. One of those is on forgiveness. As you all know, that these people need to learn to forgive. But the thing that we don't realise is they need to learn to forgive themselves first. Like most of us, we come to Christ, and the old saying, "Oh, the walls will fall down if I walk in the church." Why is that? Because we know how bad we truly are. And the biggest issue that we face is not overly accepting that Christ can forgive us, but it's accepting for Christ to forgive me, I have to forgive me. So we talk the guys through forgiveness. And then we do our third project, which is probably what most Christians love the most. It's called The Prisoner's Journey. It's where we do an 8-week walk through the book of Mark, introducing the fellas and the women to Jesus. But we introduce him in a way that's not quite normal. We introduce him as Jesus the prisoner. He was arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced to death, and died as a prisoner. So he understands what they go through. We don't realise it, but Jesus was beaten by the Roman guards, prison officers of the day. So when you have someone in prison that listens to the story of Jesus and begins to think, this fella Jesus actually understands what I'm going through. And then, I love that song that we sung, I'm Forgiven. Because the chorus of that says that Jesus, my King, would die for me. That he loved us that much, that he would die for us. And when you take that to a prisoner, when he gets to hear that someone actually loves him enough that they would die for them, touches and changes their lives. So we run those 3 programs in the prisons, and I absolutely love them. They have some great success in really changing lives. We're always looking for volunteers. For today, I've got a bit of a few things to offer up. We do a magazine that goes out every 3 months. It's just full of stories from what God's doing inside prisons across the nation. Prison Fellowship is in every state in Australia, and so each page is basically dedicated to a state, and we just talk about what God's been doing in the last 3 months. Some of those are stories on testimonies of an inmate that's found his journey of faith. Some of them are people talking about one of those programs. Some of them might be a victim of a crime that's sharing how it's impacted them doing the course. So that's some great information that you can go on our mailing list and get that sort of delivered to you once every 3 months. As an incentive today, I want to give you a free book if you sign up. It's called Why Forgive. I love this book because it's not the why forgive that we would automatically think that it's going to do. It's not a book that's going to tell me the Bible says this, this and this, and this is how you have to forgive someone. It's actually a book that is full of stories of people that have actually walked through forgiveness in their own way. It's got stories of people that were abused as kids and how they had to forgive. It's got stories of one of the main stories, which is part of the author, is a story about a copper in America that got shot and lost the use of his legs. And he talks about how when they had a big press conference and he was on stage in a wheelchair and his wife got up to speak first. And she stands up and says that I want to tell everyone that my husband has forgiven the bloke that shot him. And he's sort of sitting back there going, really, I have. But he talks about his story on how he walked through forgiving this man that shot him and took away the use of his legs. So I want to give that a free gift for anyone that signs up to our magazine. We're not after anything. I'm not after you to give me anything. It's just we want people to understand what goes on inside a prison. So the best way to do that is to read about it and to learn about it. For those that want to go a little step further and know a little bit more about prison ministry, we have a thing called the Prayer Diary. It's where we email out to everyone once a week on a Saturday morning, an email where you can sort of join with us and we give a paragraph on each day of the week as to what to pray for. That's probably the most beneficial program that we run. I know that 12 years ago my parents moved down to Tassie. They retired to Tasmania, a little place called Stanley. And there's a church in Stanley that's got about 20 people in it. And when Mum started going there, she started to talk about what I was doing in the prison, and they decided as a church to take me on as a prayer. So I knew that every week that church was praying for me and what I was doing inside the jail. And I can tell you there were miracles that took place because they were praying. Because I know that as I was walking through and different things would happen and you'd think, wow, God, how did that happen? And he'd go, it's because people are praying. They're asking for these miracles to take place. So I encourage you to do that on this little red form which I've got over there. There's just a couple of little boxes on one side. If you tick the 2 bottom ones, one's for the prayer diary and one is for the magazine. And honestly, it's a reward that you may never know, but praying for the men and women that go into prison as chaplains, you get a reward for the miracles that take place in their lives. It's an amazing opportunity for us to take the gospel into a prison. And for me, it's an amazing opportunity for a church to get behind and begin to pray into what God's doing. It takes our focus off of sometimes what we're doing in our local community and puts it on that broader scale. And let's be honest, I mean, it's prisons. It's a place where most of us don't want to think about. It's the place where we hear of someone that's been in jail and we tend to think, I don't want them coming near me, I don't want them to know me. And, you know, a prisoner comes into church and we start to put everything under lock and key because we're full of fear, which is a natural thing. But when you begin to pray for something, God begins to do something in your heart, begins to soften your heart towards those people. So I encourage you to sign up to those, to the email and the magazine. For those that are interested, we are a standalone ministry. We're not affiliated with any particular church. One of the things that I love is we are the only non-denominational prison ministry in Queensland, and we are self-funded. We're not funded through government grants. We're not funded by anyone other than God. So for those that might feel led to want to go a bit deeper and maybe sow some finances, there's an envelope or some forms over there that you can fill out, and for as little as 50 cents a day, $15 a month, you can take those programs to 3 prisoners. So it's a great opportunity. It's not something that costs a huge amount. It's 3 coffees a month, but it really helps us get the gospel out there. But today I wanted to talk about a story in the Bible that I absolutely love. It's a story in the Bible that for most of us, we only ever hear when we're in Sunday school. The story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. And I will demonstrate my age because when I went to Sunday school, we didn't have wonderful TVs. We didn't have all of the great latest stuff. We had felt boards. And I remember sitting in Sunday school with the little tree there and the little Zacchaeus sitting in the top of the tree and the little group of people that were there. And if you had a really good Sunday school teacher, they would move Jesus along as they were talking, a bit like a 3D story. But for most of us, that's where Jesus and Zacchaeus finished. It's a story in the Bible that we take in Sunday school about a short man that hides in a tree because he wants to see Jesus. And we never actually think about that again for most of our Christian life. And yet in that one little story, God has so many great little ideas on how we need to treat and show love to others. So if you've got a Bible, you can open up to Luke chapter 19. Otherwise, I will just read it for you. Might just move over here a bit. So Luke chapter 19 in verse 1. The Bible says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here I am now. I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this too is a son of Abraham. For I have come to seek and to save the lost. Now, for most of us, we look at that and we don't really think much of it. But it says there that there was a man by the name of Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector. For you and I, we don't really think much about that because we're robbed daily by the government. They're our tax collectors. But back in the day then, Zacchaeus was one of the most hated men in the city. You've got to think yourself, if you put yourself in that situation, the Romans have come in and taken over. You're working for the Romans, so your people hate you for that reason. But not only that, you're stealing from your own people. It'd be like coming in and someone here in the midst of the congregation here stealing from the rest of yous. And you go, how did he steal? Well, he collected tax, but he had to earn a bit on the side for himself. So when Zacchaeus' wife wanted to have a new dress, well, tax just went up by $100. If he had a big weekend, tax just went up. And that's what Zacchaeus did. So when the Zacchaeus name was heard, all that rose up in everyone's heart was hatred. This is a man that steals from his own people and gives to the Romans. But we don't often think about poor old Zacchaeus, because at the end of the day, he's actually stealing to make a living for himself so he can put food on the table. He's hated by his own people, but he's actually hated by the Romans as well, because the Romans hate anyone that's a Jew. So you've got this situation where Jesus is walking along and one of the most hated men in society. Now, there's a number of names that I could list off as to who we might hate in society today. You know, a few months or a few years ago, it was George Pell was one of the most hated names that were mentioned. There's other names in the Bible that or in society on the news that we hear, and there's just something inside of us that squirms and we go, no, that man doesn't deserve it. Bit like as Edwina shared, the thief on the cross. How many of us sit back and think, hang about, he's lived his whole life, done what he wanted, here he is about to die, and has the audacity to say to Jesus, remember me? Nowhere does it say in the Bible that he's apologised to everyone he's stolen from. But Jesus looks at him and sees the heart of him and says, today, you'll be with me in paradise. That's the God that we serve. So that's the setting that Zacchaeus is in. And it goes on to say that he wanted to see who Jesus was, but he was short, so he could not see him in the crowd. The Bible puts nothing in the Bible for no reason at all. I think when you sit and read the Bible, everything that Jesus decided or God decided to put in there is for us. It's got a word and a message in it. We live in Australia. We all would have heard of small man syndrome. Who hasn't heard of the small man syndrome? We sit back and it's really not something that's dedicated just to men. And it's not necessarily something that's dedicated to men that are short. Really what it's talking about is someone that has a chip on their shoulder. Someone that's got a problem. Yeah, you've got this idea that the world is against you. I think when we look at Zacchaeus, he was a man that had the world against him. Didn't really feel like anyone wanted to be near him, anyone wanted to know him. You know, it's interesting for me, I spent 7 years as a chaplain in far north Queensland. I've met so many blokes that feel like the world is against them. So many blokes that think that everywhere they go, people just hate them for who they are. You know, we talk about this thing called shame, and, you know, before I became a prison chaplain, I never really understood what that was. But when you walk around a jail and you're walking along a walkway and not one person will look at you in the eye because of the shame that's on them for what they've done, you realise that there are people out there that think that they are worthless. There are people out there that actually think that no one wants to know me. And this was a bit like Zacchaeus. So how does he see this fella Jesus, this fella that everyone is talking about? He's like the latest thing to come into town. The best way to do it is to hide in a tree. It goes on and he says, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him since Jesus was coming that way. Again, you and I, we think of a sycamore tree. I mean, until today, I haven't seen a big tree like this wonderful one that we're sitting under for quite some time. But the sycamore tree, the Bible was specific in what it said. See, the sycamore fig tree had a tree that was full of foliage, so you could actually hide in it and not be seen. Because there's so many people that want to know a little bit about Jesus. They want to see something. They want to hear about this fella that heals people, that sets people free. But, you know, if I walk into a church building, the walls are going to come down. The roof's going to fall on me. So what do? They hide in their sycamore tree. Today we don't have big trees like this that we hide in, but we have houses and we jump onto things like Facebook and we log on and we go, oh, Highfields Church Facebook page. Who are they? And we log on and we start to see Pastor Matt sharing a story and we think, oh, I like what he's saying. But they sit at home and they start to watch because they're not game to walk in because I don't know how I'm going to be respected. What are people going to say if I walk through the front gate? See, we face that today in society. I mean, one of the biggest things against building a church really is the fact that people don't want to come for two reasons. Because they've either been or they've met a Christian. And as sad as that is so true. Like you think about, I mean, I look at my own life over the years that I've been a Christian. You know, there's times when I've prejudged people. Now, I may not have prejudged someone the same way you have, and you may not have done it the same way I have. But every single one of us, there's that one person. You know, for me, all right, it wasn't someone in a prison, but there's always someone where you go, oh, do they really deserve that grace, Lord? Do they really deserve your love? I mean, look what they've done. And for most of us, we have those questions. But Jesus came to save everyone, even Zacchaeus, even those hiding in Facebook, even those that aren't game to come along. And I love that Jesus just faces that. The Bible goes on and talks about it, and it says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately, for I must stay at your house today. I love how Jesus is forceful. He's looking at Zacchaeus and he's making it extremely clear that I must. Something in me is compelling me to stay at your house today. You know, at this point in time, Zacchaeus is thinking, who is this fella? I'm hiding in a tree. No one knows me. No one can see me. This fella that's never been in town, that actually doesn't know what I do for a living, now knows my name and is specifically saying, come down, for I must eat or spend the night with you. Which is an interesting thing, because really, it's fine for me to walk up to someone and say g'day. It's fine for me to have a bit of a chat. I can do that. I can shake your hand and tell you that God loves you. But what is it about sitting and having a meal with someone? I mean, the Bible doesn't specifically say that Jesus ate with Zacchaeus, but it does say that he stayed the night with him, and I'm sure he had to be fed at night. And there's an interesting point in when you start to read through the Gospels. Our state manager, Graham, he's been involved in prison ministry since 2005. He got saved in 2003 when he was visiting a prison to see a loved one that was locked up, and one of the chaplains shared the gospel with him. But he's an interesting character, and he was saying that he's read all the Gospels and he sees that Jesus has this ministry called a backside ministry. You think, what the hell's that? It's where Jesus, all the way through the Gospels, you'll see the words Jesus reclined, and Jesus reclined with him, and Jesus reclined with him, and Jesus reclined with him. And what does the recline mean? It means that you actually are sitting back, you're relaxed, you're taking it easy. You may not be sharing a meal, but you might be having a coffee. You might be just sitting back. And for me, I realise that when I meet with people, I can have a wonderful conversation and build a great relationship with them. But if I actually sit and eat with people, it's different. So I was absolutely blessed. I used to go to the prison 7 years. I did it on a Thursday from about 8 o'clock in the morning till it went to about 8:30 at night, and then wound back to 7 o'clock at night. So I was in jail for 11 to 12 hours on a Thursday. In about 2013, one of the blokes decided that, you must get hungry, Darren. I said, yeah, I do. So I used to visit what we call the main centre in the morning, go through to 5 o'clock, and then leave the main centre and go across to the farm. So the farm is just a low security. So when he moved to the farm, he goes, here, share some of my food, Darren. I said, oh, great, thanks, mate. Then a couple of weeks later, he says to the cook, put some aside for Darren and do him a plate. And that started a tradition that I absolutely loved, that lasted for the rest of the time that I was a prison chaplain, where every Thursday night in that particular unit, someone, whoever it was the cook, would cook me a meal. But what it meant was I actually got to have a meal with these fellas. And I was driving home, actually it wasn't until we moved down to Brisbane, and I was just driving along thinking about those times. And God sort of said to me, think of every single person that you've sat with and had a meal with. So I thought of all these different fellas. I said, now think of all the other blokes you visited. What's the difference in the relationship? I went, wow, Lord, you're spot on. The guys that I sat and cooked with, I have a deeper, more personal relationship with than the fellas that I didn't. Now, don't get me wrong, I like to talk. Now, I could sit with someone and have a coffee with them and talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours, no dramas. And I could do that in a jail, and we're blessed as chaplains. I mean, in Queensland, we're the only people that get to walk into a prison, into a 50-man unit by myself, sit down at a table and have 1, 2 to half a dozen inmates around me and sit and have a chat. There's no one else can do that. No one else has the privilege of being able to do that. So I take chaplaincy as an amazing opportunity where you can be honest. So I've had plenty of conversations with blokes sitting at a table across from each other, having a coffee. But the guys that cook for me, it's something different. It's mostly the guys that cooked for me that chased me up on the outside and found me on Facebook. They're the ones that want to have coffee with me on the outside. They're the ones that want to stay in touch with me. Did I get to preach to them? Not really. There's one particular bloke, it's amazing because they cooked for me for about 3 years. He was a cook, and he was a good cook too. We had some wonderful food. Never mind, I won't go there, I'll get hungry. But every night, the only thing I would preach to them was, I would ask them every Thursday night, do you mind if I say grace? And every week was the same answer. It's what we're waiting for. It's the only night of the week that they would not touch their food. You got 4 big, tough men sitting at a table waiting for the chaplain to say grace. But I showed them love. I demonstrated love. When I think of Jesus and Zacchaeus, when Jesus called Zacchaeus down and said, I must stay at your house today, what he was actually saying was, I think you're all right, Zach. And for us, it's a problem with that. For most of us, we have an issue with saying to someone that you're okay. You know, we look at what they've done, we look at who they are, and we struggle to sit back and go, I can actually give you my time. Because what Jesus was showing was he was showing this idea of acceptance. That I accept you for who you are right now. I don't expect you to change. Because for most of us, that's the issue. It's like, I'll love you when you sort of, when you start to toe the line and do the right thing. You come to church drunk. No, I can't love you while you're doing that. You come to church sober, and then maybe we can have something. You dress our way. I love these churches that have these Facebook pages and all that where they say, come as you are. But truthfully, no, you can't come as you are. What they're really saying is come as we are. Because if I turned up in a pair of thongs, board shorts and a singlet, how would I be respected in a church that's people turning up dressed in slacks and a shirt? They're not going to accept me until I change and conform to their way. Because as humanity, that's what we are. But Jesus came to say, that's not how I want you to be. I don't want you to be like that. I want you to demonstrate and show love to every single person you come across. And having a meal with someone, having a coffee with someone is a brilliant way to demonstrate the love of God. It's amazing when you sit and listen to people how walls just come down. They begin to open up. They begin to talk about what's going on in their life. You begin to get an understanding as to maybe why they're where they are, why they are living the life that they're living. And then the Bible goes on and it says that all the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Interesting, isn't it? Jesus makes a point of putting that in there. I think about churches today and I think, that particular people are a group of people that every church has. Now, you've got to remember, this is Jesus. He was well known at the time. He's walking along. He had a massive entourage following him. So we know that the 12 disciples were right there. We know that the 70 were right there. By this time, he's already fed 5,000. So we know the freeloaders are hanging on. The ones that are like, he's going to give me a free meal, so I'm going to come and listen. And they're there. But there's also that other group of people that are in the church, but we don't like to acknowledge. The gossips. The ones that just want to talk about everyone else. In our day, they don't do a lot of talking, but what they do, they have their phone there. Pastor Matt's down at Coffee Club and he's with someone and they walk past and they click, put it on Facebook. See who Pastor Matt's with today? Who's he doing sitting with that person? We make this judgment. Jesus had them. They're there, they're muttering amongst themselves. But what I love about Jesus is that he's God. So he could have done it in any number of ways. He could have continued walking past the tree, pulled Peter aside and said, Peter, there's a bloke up in the tree back there. Can you just go and call him down, tell him I want to spend the night with him and I'll meet him there at 5 or 6 o'clock once we got rid of the crowd. No one will know. So Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was quite happy to publicly demonstrate his love and acceptance for all of humanity. He did that finally and ultimately at the cross, where he hung on the cross publicly to demonstrate how much he loves humanity. And I tell you what, I was the guiltiest person of all. 10 years ago, I was not going to show and demonstrate the love of God in public to everyone. There's certain people that I knew God loved, but we'll keep them over there and we'll worry about that later when there's no one around. But the truth of the matter is, Jesus is saying, I want you to demonstrate my love to everyone, no matter who they are, no matter what their background. See, because the biggest problem with us is that we look at people on the outside. And I thought about this years ago, when we talk about Thomas in the Bible. And most times you say Thomas and people go, well, who are you talking about? It's not until you go, doubting Thomas. They go, I know the fella. Here's a bloke that questioned, well, let's not really accuse him of doubting, but questioned, is God real once? And we remember him by that. And yet if you study the life of Thomas, he went on to start something like 2,500 churches in Asia Minor, had amazing ministry, saw lives totally changed and set free, but very rarely do we hear anything about that from the pulpit because we talk about doubting Thomas. And when you look at life itself, you know, I was a truck driver years ago and I was known as Darren the Truckie. But that's not who I was. That's a job that I had. It was just something that I did to earn a living, but people all of a sudden tagged me and went, "You're that way." And the problem with society today is that's what we do. We prejudge people by the cars they drive, the clothes they wear, houses they live in, suburbs that they live in. And we have this prejudgment where God's saying, I want you to get rid of that. Because how someone looks is not necessarily who they are as a person. It could just be some stuff that they've gone through. You know, they could have faced some amazing hardships in life and lost everything. And here they are living on the street. But it's not saying that they're a horrible, evil person. It just means that they've gone through some stuff that's caused them to lose everything. And I think that Jesus is always telling us to continue to demonstrate that love. Because what Jesus was doing was accepting people. And for us, we struggle. I had an opportunity about 5 years ago. I walked into a unit and there was a big fella, bodybuilder. I hadn't seen him before, so I just walked up and said, "G'day, how you going?" And we started a conversation. And it didn't take long for him to reveal that he was a Satanist. And he began to tell me that my God was a horrible, evil God and that his God was wonderful and that his God was all of this. And we had an interesting conversation that lasted about 45 minutes. At that point, I had a choice. I could respond how I probably was taught to respond and wanted to respond, and that was, "You're wrong, you're evil, get away from me, Satan, I don't want nothing to do with you, you're a horrible man, clear off." Or I could respond by engaging in conversation. I chose the latter. I'm not going to say that was anything to do with me. That was all God, not Darren. Because he gave me some interesting points to talk about. So by standing there and continuing the conversation, I realised that the reason this fella hated God so much was because he had, I can't remember if it was his mother or his grandmother, but she'd been to church and she got cancer. And when he was 10, she died. But she died and all he saw was this lady going through horrific pain, crying out to God for healing, and God doing nothing. So he's decided now that God's not real. So we started a conversation. So I said to him, "All right, I'll be honest with you. Can't guarantee that my God didn't kill your grandmother." Put a smile on his face. I said, "But you can't guarantee me that your God didn't." He looked. I said, "Let's be honest, it's a 50-50 chance, mate. 50-50 you're right, 50-50 I'm right. It's cause for us to think about it, isn't it?" So we continued on the conversation, had a bit of a laugh, and I left. When I left, I made a note of looking at what his name was because I knew what cell he was in. I just began to pray for him. A couple of months later, I walked into another cell and he was in another unit. And this particular unit was one of the newer units. So to give you an idea, you walk in through an airlock, and as you walk out of the airlock into the building, right here was what they call a fishbowl, so the officers sit there. Directly in front of me was 25 units in a U shape on the bottom, and then another 25 units in a U shape on the top. And then to the left was an exercise yard. The exercise yard is full of concrete. It's got Besser block walls, and at one end it's got a cage, and the cage goes across the roof. And there's a glass door, and it's about 2 metres in, and I walked in, and I always had a look out to see who was in the yard. And I saw that fella and another bloke. And as I looked at them, the big fella caught my eye, and just something inside, man, it just sunk. At that moment, I actually wanted to turn around and walk out because I thought, I am in for it. They made their way in. "We'll have a chat, chaplain." It's all good. So we sat down at a table. Now, the tables in prison aren't wonderful tables, but they're tables. They're made out of metal. They have 6 seats around them. So 2 seats there, 2 seats here, 1 at each end. They're a little round pad about that big, and they're made out of metal, and they hurt after sitting on them for a while. So we sat down. So the big fella sat across from me. The younger fella, the smaller bloke, sat here, and I sat here. And we started having a conversation. The young fella started to get quite aggravated because I wasn't agreeing with what they were saying. And at one point, I'm sitting there thinking, this is not going to end well. There's an opportunity for me to get hit in the face here, Lord. And I was challenged with this thing that most of us are challenged with at some point in our life. Am I willing to cop a flogging for Jesus? I'll be honest, I battled. Bit of pride rose up when I said, I'm willing to cop it, Lord. But it didn't last for long because at the same breath, straight after that, I'm like, but Jesus. I can say I'll cop it, but let's have a look at this. So chaplains get to sit in here. Look at how close I'm sitting to them. If they hit me, what's going to happen to chaplaincy in Queensland? You know, I'm bargaining with God. I don't want to, in all honesty, I don't want to get hit. At that moment, praise Jesus. Whole group of officers came in, senior came in. They decided there and then to do a cell search. But the blessing was, in that situation, as a chaplain, I would have to leave the unit. The senior came in. I said, "Hey, boss, what do you want me to do?" He goes, "Oh, you'll be right, chappie. Just sit there. We'll only be 10 minutes. I thought, wow, praise Jesus. So I sat at the table. 20 minutes passed. They do everything. I thought, let's see how this goes. As soon as the seniors walked out, them two fellas come straight back. But praise God, they both sat opposite me. By this time, most of the unit had known that we were having an interesting conversation. I ended up with about half a dozen blokes, which I didn't realise till the end was semicircle around my back and around my side. They told me that they had your back, Pastor. I said, "You little ripper." But one of them was a bloke from Sierra Leone, and he starts to preach the gospel in a way that I'd never seen. He stands there and he's using the F word more than I can remember, and more than I've ever heard, and it wasn't the word faith, but he's sharing his story. So his story was that he grew up in Sierra Leone, and he was dating this girl, and this girl's grandmother was a witch doctor. And they were out one day, and this vicious dog was coming to attack them. And the grandmother put a curse on the dog, and it dropped dead mid-flight. And then he was telling me about this person that this grandmother had put a curse on. And the curse was that, I don't know the technical name, his words were that the nice way of putting it, your bowels closed up and you could not release anything. And they died within 7 days. And he broke up with this grandmother's granddaughter in a horrible way. And she put a curse on him. So he knows the power of this lady. So what does he do? He runs to a church and just sits inside a church. It's a Catholic church. Doesn't talk about whether or not he encountered Christ, but he sat in a church. But the crutch of it was, or the punchline was, I'm alive and I'm here. God's real. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, Jesus, I have never, ever heard the gospel shared like this before. But it made them think. Made me think. I'm like, who am I to judge who you're going to protect? Because this bloke has now moved over to Australia. He's a refugee, and he's now doing a fairly lengthy sentence for fairly physical crimes. But here he is telling that God is real, that God saved his life. So our conversation went on for a bit longer. We ended up at a 2.5-hour conversation. And at the end of it, the big fella stood up, put his hand out, shook my hand. He went, "You've been a formidable opponent, Darren. Thank you for your time. I've got to go and train." And walked off. Wow, praise Jesus. The young fella got up and walked away, and that's when the guys around me said, "We had your back, Pastor. We were there for you. If they were going to hurt you, we would protect you." And I was thankful for that. But, you know, long story short, about 3 weeks later, the younger of the two ended up giving his heart to the Lord. He was in another unit. I went and saw him the next week. We had a chat, and then a Christian in the unit actually led him to the Lord. And it's like, wow, Jesus, you're just amazing. But this big, we continued on a relationship that is not normal. Every time I would see him in the jail, he would raise his hand, he would do that funny sign, and he'd say, "Praise the name of Satan." And every time I'd look at him with a smile on my face and say, "No, brother, I praise the name of Jesus." He'd laugh, then he'd give me a big bear hug. We built a friendship because I didn't necessarily argue with him. I didn't try and push him to believe in my God. I just loved him for where he was. You know, I had a couple of guys that used to get cranky at him because he'd always quote the Satanic Bible to me. He would have it and he'd always argue with him. But I didn't mind it because for two reasons. It was me being able to learn a little bit about how they operate. I got to learn about the Satanic Bible that I've never ever touched in my life, had never seen, but got to hear what it said. But what I loved was because I engaged with him, he actually began to accept me for who I was. I mean, you got to think about it. He's a Satanist. He was a big bloke. He was 6 foot high and 6 foot wide. He was muscle. And he would give me this massive bear hug. Say, "I love you, bro." I remember talking to him. I saw him on a walkway one day, and we're in the middle of the prison, and he's telling me how his dad was sick. I said, "Mate, do you mind if I pray?" He goes, "No, that'll be all right." I said, "When I pray," I said, "the Bible talks about laying on of hands." I said, It's all whatever. I said, but I just like to pray. I like to put my hand on your shoulder. Would that be all right? Yeah, that'll be all right. So here we are, a Satanist, in the middle of a prison, with a chaplain, with his hand on his shoulder, praying for him. To me, that's amazing. That's the love of God in action. Did he ever give his heart to the Lord? Not that I saw. But about a week before he got out, he was over at the farm and we were walking up the walkway and he goes, going to start a satanic church when I get out, Darren? I went, oh, really? He goes, absolutely. I want you to come. I said, you want me to come? He said, yeah. I said, you sure? I'm a Christian. Yeah. I'll bring God with me. Yeah, that's all right. I love you, bro. I want you to come. I'm like, here's a bloke that's so needy for the genuine love of people that he's going to ask someone that doesn't believe in his religion to come and be a part of his church. That's what the demonstration of love is. See, we talk about preaching the gospel, and preaching the gospel has so many different meanings to it. Preaching the gospel could be handing someone a cup of coffee. Preaching the gospel could be what you call closing the deal, where you sit with someone and you share the message about Jesus and you ask them if they want to invite Christ into their hearts and they say yes. And they are wonderful times. I've had so many of them where blokes have come into prison and I've been able to sit with them and share my faith, and they've encountered Christ and they've begun their own journey of faith. But there's a bloke years ago by the name of Engel, and he wrote this story, thesis, whatever you want to call it, it's known as the Engel scale. And basically what it is that there's a number of them, but I'll talk about this one. You've got -8, +8. +8 is someone that's a definite, like Pastor Matt, they're up there with Christ. In -8, you got this Satanist bloke. He said, our job as a Christian is to get them one step closer. 0 is where they encounter Christ. If you meet someone at an 8 and you leave them and they're at a 7, you've demonstrated the love of Jesus. If you happen to be the privileged one that meets them when they're at a -1 and you share the love of Christ and they say yes to Jesus and they become a 0, praise God, you got to see the harvest. But there's this fella that spent a fair bit of time in prison and God found him fit and just to write half the New Testament. And he wrote a verse where he said, I, Paul, sowed, Apollos watered, but the Holy Spirit added the increase. And for me, when God gave me a revelation on that I don't have to be the one that leads them to Christ. I just have to be the one that points them to Jesus. If I do what God asks me to do, and sometimes that's just something simple. I remember when I was in Bible college and we did these things called explosion days. It was a day where you would go out in groups and you would street witness. And I remember we chose to go to a shopping centre car park or bus stop. And I was sitting there and I'm trying to listen to God and who do I talk to, Lord? And there was it's going to sound facetious, but I'm just going to say it, a little old lady sitting on a bench. And he said, I want you to go up to her. I went, okay. So I went up and sat down and he said, this is what I want you to do. I just want you to look at her and say, you're on God's mind and he loves you. Okay? So I did that. At that point, I saw one little tear roll down in her eye, just start to come down. She did not turn. She did not look at me. She did not acknowledge that I was there. I got up and walked away. And God said, you did all I wanted you to do. See, for most of us, sometimes all we have to do is just say that one thing. People just need to know that they're loved. Jesus was looking at Zacchaeus and he was saying, you're loved. One of the other reasons I love this story on Zacchaeus is because it ruins our theology on salvation. Because for you and I, we know that lest you be born again, how do you get born again? Well, you say this thing called the sinner's prayer. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against the sinner's prayer. But it's actually not the only way. Because there's no record of Zacchaeus saying the sinner's prayer. There's no record of Zacchaeus saying, Jesus, you're king. The only record we have is Zacchaeus going on to say, today, Lord, I give half of what I own away, and if I've ripped someone off, I'll pay him back 4 times. And instantly Jesus goes, oh, Zacchaeus, salvation's found your house today. But for us, it ruins our theology because you didn't say that prayer. But for me, I got to witness blokes where I never got to see them say the prayer. I had one young fella that I met. We talked with him, and I didn't think much of the conversation. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but he asked me for a Bible. So I gave him a Bible. One of the roles as a chaplain, we carry these little clear plastic bags. I used to load mine up with reading material. I'd take a couple of Christian magazines, a few Christian books, always carried Bibles. So I handed him a Bible. Never saw him for 9 months. I walked into a unit one day and he came running up to sit and chat with me. He goes, "Oh, brother." Starts telling me how he's found a relationship with Jesus, how he's encountered God and how wonderful God is. And this all happened because I gave him a Bible. He didn't need anyone to lead him. Jesus actually did it by himself. You know, I think of the Gideons. How many Bibles have they handed out? And some of us would go, "Oh, what, you just gave him a Bible and left it?" Yeah, Jesus knows what he's doing. Jesus doesn't actually need me. I like to think he does. I like to think that I'm so important that he can't get through to anyone without me. But the truth is he actually doesn't need me at all. But he chooses to use me when I'm a willing vessel. And all he's asking me to do is demonstrate love. You think about that word, demonstrate love. What is love? Yeah, for me, once love was talking politics for 30 minutes. Drove me insane. I walked into a sports yard and a bloke sat with me and he said, "Oh, let's have a coffee." So we sat down, we had a brew, and he started about politics. And I'm sitting there thinking, Jesus, why am I here? There's so much I could be doing. I tried my best. I found a way to insert 2 scriptures in the conversation. I thought, I'm going to get the gospel in here somewhere. But at the end of it, he sort of finished and I had to move on, and he shook my hand. He goes, "Mate, I really want to thank you." He goes, "I appreciate your time." He said, "You know, there's 800 blokes in this prison and I can't talk to any of them like that. None of them are interested. None of them have the mentality. None of them know it. Because I really appreciate your time." And I walked off and God went, "You just showed more love in that half an hour than you have in the last 5 weeks." I went, "Wow, Jesus." Why? Because I showed someone that they were important. See, in this lifestyle, we forget that people are important. We've got an agenda. The agenda is, I've got to grow the church. I want to see them get saved. But Jesus didn't come to grow the church. Jesus didn't come to see people get saved. He came to have people encounter him. Because I've seen plenty of people that have said a prayer and 2 weeks later they're back out in their old ways. But then again, I've seen people that have actually encountered Christ. And man alive, their life changes. They encounter the one that loves them so much that he died a horrible death on a cross for them. And people don't understand that there is someone out there that loves me that much. That loves me enough that will actually sit and listen to my story. That will then listen enough to when I see them and next time they ask me about something that I've said. That will blow people away. Honestly, if you remember someone's story. I didn't realise how important that was till I started a new job in Cairns. I was driving a truck for a company called Horizon. My first day I met a bloke that was going on annual leave for 5 weeks and he was having a baby. And all they did was introduce me to him because he was a forklift driver. We spent 30 seconds, never came back. 5 weeks later, he's loading my truck. I said, "Oh, how's the baby going?" And he stopped and he literally threw himself back on the seat. "How do you know?" I said, "Oh, you were going on holidays when I started. And you mentioned you're having a baby, just curious how it's going." But that one incident led to a point where this bloke would often sit on the forklift, put his foot up, turn it off, and have a chat about life. Found out that he lost a baby through SIDS. Talked me through that whole story. All because I remembered that he went on holidays to have a baby. See, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. What Jesus was demonstrating to Zacchaeus was, I care about you enough that I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care what they say. I'm actually going to come and spend some quality time with you. It spoke volumes to him. So if there's one thing I can encourage you to do, because I know that not everyone can do prison ministry. I love it. I could tell you all the wonderful things about it, but it's not for everyone. But loving people, that's something we can all do. You know, when you put fuel in your car, how's your day? But be genuine. How long you been at work? Because when you do that, people are so shocked. They want to know more. Why are you so nice? Oh, it's my God, Jesus. He tells me I should love people. It's an opportunity to begin to share. So if I can leave you with one thing today, would be that you would go home and in the next week you would demonstrate the love of Jesus to someone. Whether that just be a listening ear, a pat on the back, just giving someone a hug, whatever it might take, it's just being Christ to that person in their time of need. I thank you for your time. I thank you for the opportunity, Pastor Matt, to come and share with you. As you can see, I've got a bit of a table over there. I'm more than happy to chat with anyone afterwards. If you've got any questions, no questions too silly, no questions out of bounds, I'll answer what I can. If you want to know a bit more, there's some magazines over there. But thank you very much. It's been an honour and a privilege to share the gospel with you.